North Korea, they're always kind of painted as this like mysterious place, super secretive, and a land of contrasts.
Definitely.
But today we're diving into some new stuff happening over there. Stuff that might really surprise you.
Yeah, it all starts with something pretty unexpected. Kim Yo-jong. Kim Jong-un's younger sister?
Right.
Well, she became president in September 2024.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? No one saw that coming. And what's even more interesting is what she's doing with the country. Like, she's bringing in all this modernization, but she's still keeping a lot of the old North Korean ways.
It's definitely a fascinating paradox.
For sure. So to really understand what's going on,
right,
we need to understand her. Like, who is this Kim Yo-jong?
Yeah, so before becoming president, she held some really important positions like First Vice Minister and Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea, the ruling party,
right,
which is founded on the principles of Juche. That unique blend of Marxism, Leninism, and Korean nationalism.
So she wasn't just like there for show.
No, not at all.
She was actually making policy and working on relationships with other countries, especially with South Korea and the US.
Exactly. And her style. It's a really interesting mix of diplomacy, but also assertiveness. Some analysts even think she's got a more strategic mindset, more reform-minded.
That's where it gets really interesting then. Because that blend of being practical and wanting to reform things, it's showing up in some pretty surprising ways.
Like, one of the biggest changes is this wave of modernization sweeping through North Korea, particularly in their economy. We're seeing big efforts to revamp their agricultural and tech sectors, which, have really struggled under international sanctions.
Yeah, those sanctions have been tough.
Yeah.
They've really limited North Korea's access to global markets and resources. So how are they dealing with that?
Well, for one, Kim Yo-jong's administration has really transformed agriculture. And we're not talking small changes here. Since mid-2024, productivity has shot up by something like 15%.
Wow.
And it's because of things like introducing drought-resistant crops and getting fertilizer to the areas with food shortages. It's had a big impact on their food security.
Yeah, that's huge for a country facing so much pressure from outside.
For sure.
This brings us to another really interesting part of this modernization, the push for homegrown innovation. It's like they're not just importing solutions, they're encouraging local talent.
Absolutely. And a great example is agricultural drones. See, with those sanctions, relying on outside tech isn't really sustainable. By developing their own tech, they're becoming more independent.
So we've got a leader who's not afraid to change things up, big improvements in agriculture because of smart reforms, and this push to be more self-sufficient with technology. But what about the people? How are these changes affecting the average North Korean?
That's a really important question. One of Kim Yo-jong's big focuses has been on national unity and improving people's lives. And it's not just talk. We're actually seeing real efforts to make it happen.
Right. It's not just about the economy. It's about social progress, too.
Exactly. Healthcare facilities have gotten a lot better, especially in rural areas. And there's more of an effort to distribute resources fairly. Unlike before, when the elite would get most of the good stuff. These efforts have really improved the quality of life for a lot of people. Though, of course, there's still big challenges.
It seems like they're trying to create a more balanced and successful society, one that cares about its people's well-being, not just economic growth. It's a big shift, especially for a country usually known for its military and political ideology.
It definitely challenges our assumptions. And this shift isn't just happening inside North Korea. Kim Yo-jong's leadership has changed how they interact with the rest of the world, too. You see, for decades, they've been super independent, almost isolated.
So they're not completely cutting themselves off from the world.
Not exactly. They still want to be self-reliant, but they're not as isolated as they used to be. Kim Yo-jong has been working on diplomacy, especially with China and Russia, trying to get economic partnerships and trade deals. It's a smart way to deal with those sanctions and grow their economy through these alliances.
So it's a balancing act, trying to engage with the global community while still holding on to their principles of independence.
Exactly. It's a new era of diplomacy for them, much more practical and less confrontational than we saw with her predecessor.
But the West is definitely watching all this. What do they think of this new, more open North Korea? Are they buying it?
The West is definitely paying attention, but they're being cautious. They're still concerned about human rights, which is a big sticking point.
Sure.
But they've also noticed that North Korea isn't making as many military threats. It seems Kim Yo-jong is more focused on growing the country and keeping things stable. It's a big change from before. This has led to some improvement in relations, but there's still a lot of skepticism.
Okay, so we've got a new leader shaking things up. Better agriculture, a focus on their own technology, improvements for the people, and a new approach to other countries. But when did all this start happening? Was it all at once or more gradual?
Well, Kim Yo-jong took over right after Kim Jong-un died. But these changes, especially the economic ones, took some time. It was a carefully planned transition.
So it wasn't just flipping a switch and everything changed overnight.
Right, it was more like a carefully thought out plan that unfolded over time.
Like a strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Those first few months were all about solidifying her power, showing stability both inside and outside the country, like laying the groundwork.
Makes sense.
What's interesting is that even then, we saw hints that things were changing. They weren't as aggressive or confrontational as they used to be.
Yeah, I remember that. There were fewer military threats. It was like they were trying to calm things down.
Exactly. They were signaling a change in approach. Then, around mid-2024, the economic reforms started taking shape. They focused on internal improvements, making agriculture more productive, and investing in their own tech. It was like they realized they needed to be stronger internally before they could do more on the world stage.
So it was about building a strong base before branching out.
Exactly. And this is when they saw those big jumps in agricultural productivity. Shows how focused and strategic they were.
It really is impressive how quickly they achieved that, given all the limitations.
Yeah,
It speaks to their determination.
it really does. And then as we moved into fall 2024, things started moving even faster. The plans for technology became more concrete. They wanted to be innovative and independent.
So they weren't just trying to catch up. They wanted to do their own thing.
Exactly. It was a real shift in mindset. They were moving away from relying on others and towards self-reliance. And this new confidence seems to have boosted their diplomacy efforts.
Yeah, by the end of 2024, they were much more active diplomatically, especially with China and Russia. They made economic partnerships, signed trade deals, and really started to become a player on the global stage again. It's pretty amazing considering how isolated they'd been.
It is. It's a testament to Kim Yo-jong's leadership and her ability to adapt and find a new way forward for North Korea. But this raises a big question. Is this real change or just a tactic? Is this new North Korea here to stay, or is it all just for show?
That's the big question, isn't it? Are they truly changing, or are they just trying to ease pressure and hold on to power?
It's a question that has a lot of people wondering. And honestly, it's too early to tell for sure. We'll have to wait and see if these changes are lasting.
So it's a wait-and-see situation. We're cautiously optimistic, but we know things could still go either way.
Exactly. It's a complex situation. We need to keep watching and analyzing to understand what's really happening.
And that's what we're doing here, trying to make sense of it all, to separate fact from fiction, and to give you, our listener, a deeper understanding of this changing world.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the headlines,
Right.
but we're here to dig deeper, to look beyond the surface, and to explore the things that often get missed.
That's what our deep dives are all about. Exploring in depth, uncovering the hidden layers, and helping people understand better. And this topic, well, it's important for everyone.
It is. What happens in North Korea affects the whole world. Their nuclear program, their human rights record, their economic policies. These things can shape international relations and global stability.
For sure.
So understanding North Korea, what motivates them and where they're headed, is really important for understanding the world today.
It's about seeing the connections, how seemingly isolated events are actually part of a bigger picture. And in this chapter of North Korea's story, the narrative is changing. Kim Yo-jong is leading them in a new direction, one that's full of both promise and uncertainty.
It's a time of transition and change, a time that requires us to pay attention and think critically. And as we navigate this new territory, it's crucial to be open-minded, skeptical, and willing to challenge what we think we know.
Because sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
And with North Korea, that's definitely true. So as we continue this deep dive, let's keep that in mind. Let's be open to the unexpected, to the nuances, and to the possibility that we might only be seeing the tip of the iceberg.
It's a journey of discovery, and we're all in this together.
And that brings us to a key question. What does this change in North Korea's approach mean for the global balance of power?
It's a question that's got analysts and policymakers talking.
On the one hand, they seem to want to modernize, to grow their economy, to advance technologically. It suggests they might want to integrate with the rest of the world to become a player on the global stage, working within the existing rules.
Right.
But then there's their history of isolation, secrecy, and military strength. It reminds us that North Korea has always done things their own way, defying expectations and making their own rules, even if it means going against the norm. So how do these seemingly opposite impulses fit together? How does Kim Yo-jong balance engaging with the world and keeping North Korea's unique identity? It really gets to the core of her leadership and what she wants for the country's future.
It's a tricky balancing act, and she seems to be doing it with a mix of practicality and strategic thinking.
It's like she's saying, we'll engage, but on our own terms. We'll adapt, but we won't compromise who we are.
Yeah.
It's a bold strategy, and it could go either way. If she could successfully modernize North Korea's economy, bring them into the global trade system, and keep things peaceful with their neighbors, it could completely change the geopolitical landscape of East Asia.
It could lead to more cooperation and prosperity, a big change from the tensions and uncertainty we've seen on the Korean Peninsula for so long. It would be huge, not just for the region, but for the whole world.
But if she fails, if things don't go as planned, if tensions rise again, the consequences could be disastrous. Things could easily spiral out of control, and the impact would be felt far beyond North Korea.
The risk of conflict, of nuclear weapons spreading, of regional instability, those are all very real threats.
And the world is watching, waiting to see how this all plays out.
They are?
It shows us that the global balance of power is always in flux, shaped by the actions of countries, the decisions of leaders, the interplay of history, and current trends. And North Korea, which used to be seen as a minor player, is now right in the middle of it all. Their actions matter, and their decisions will shape the future.
Absolutely. As we try to understand all of this, it's important to stay informed, to think critically, and to be willing to question our own assumptions, because what's happening in North Korea today could change the world as we know it.
And speaking of changing the world, we can't forget about the people at the heart of this story. It's easy to get caught up in the big ideas of power and strategy, but it's the lives of everyday people that are most affected by these global changes.
Right.
Behind all the headlines, the politics, the economic numbers, there are real people just living their lives, hoping for a better future, and their stories often get lost. But those stories are so important.
They are.
They give us the human context, the emotional connection, the reminder that these global events have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. It's their resilience, their ingenuity, their spirit that ultimately shapes what happens to a nation. And understanding their experiences, their hopes, and their fears is crucial for understanding the whole situation.
So let's shift our focus for a bit and dive into the human side of this story. Let's explore how these changes in North Korea are affecting everyday people and what we can learn from their experiences about this evolving nation.
Sounds good. It's crazy how these personal stories can get lost when we talk about big global changes. But they're what make this whole deep dive so interesting, don't you think?
Totally. It's easy to focus on the big picture, but when you look at how it affects real people,
Right.
it adds a whole new layer to our understanding. And speaking of layers, I think it's time we went back a bit and looked at the timeline of all this. It's one thing to know where things are now, but seeing how they got there can really help us understand the forces at play,
Definitely. Context is so important when you're dealing with a complex situation like this. As we talked about before, Kim Yo-jong became leader right after Kim Jong-un passed away. But the changes we're seeing didn't happen overnight. It was all very carefully planned out, wouldn't you say?
It's like they had a plan, a roadmap for how to transition and change the country's direction. Makes you wonder what their strategy meetings must have been like.
Oh, I bet they were intense. But those first few months were all about establishing her power, showing that things were stable both inside and outside the country, like laying the foundation before you build a house. It's interesting, though, even then, there were signs that things were different, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember those reports about them not making as many military threats. It was like they were trying to send a message, maybe suggesting they were open to being less confrontational.
Exactly. It was a calculated move to ease tensions and signal a potential shift in their approach to international relations. And then, as we moved into mid-2024, the economic reforms started. They focused on improving things at home, making agriculture more productive, and investing in their own technology. It seems like they realized they needed to make the country stronger before trying to do more globally.
It's like You wouldn't build a house on shaky ground.
Yeah.
They needed to be more resilient and self-sufficient before they could really step onto the world stage.
Precisely. It was a pragmatic approach. They knew sanctions were limiting them, so they focused on building strength internally. And that's when we saw those huge improvements in agriculture, which showed how dedicated and strategic they were being.
It's incredible how much they achieved in such a short time, especially with all the restrictions they are facing. It really speaks to their determination and resourcefulness.
It does. And then in fall 2024, things really started moving. Their plans for technology became more concrete, and they were clearly focused on innovation and independence. They weren't content with just copying what others were doing. They wanted to find their own way in the tech world.
Yeah, it was like they were saying, we're not going to depend on anyone else, we're going to build our own future. There's something really bold about that, this refusal to let others dictate their path.
It's definitely a bold move, and it seems to be working. This confidence, this belief in their own abilities, seems to have led to a more proactive approach on the global stage.
Right. By the end of 2024, they were doing a lot more diplomacy, especially with China and Russia. They formed economic partnerships, signed trade deals, and really started to become a major player on the world stage again. It's pretty remarkable considering how isolated they've been.
It is. It really shows Kim Yo-jong's leadership and how she's been able to adapt and create a new way forward for North Korea. But it makes you wonder, is this a genuine change or just a strategy? Is this new North Korea here to stay, or is it all an act?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Are they truly changing? Or are they just trying to get out from under pressure and hold on to power?
It's a question a lot of people are asking, and the truth is, it's too early to say for sure. Only time will tell if these changes are real and lasting.
So we wait and see, cautiously optimistic, but aware that things could still go either way.
Exactly. It's complicated. We need to keep watching and analyzing to understand what's really happening.
And that's what we're doing here. Trying to make sense of it all, to separate fact from fiction, and to give you, our listener, a deeper understanding of this changing world.
Right.
It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines,
It is.
but we're here to go deeper, to look beyond the surface, and to explore the things that often get missed.
That's what our deep dives are all about. Exploring in depth, uncovering the hidden layers, and helping people understand better. And this topic, well, it affects everyone.
It really does. What happens in North Korea impacts the whole world. Their nuclear program, their human rights record, their economic policies, these things can shape international relations and global stability.
They can.
So, understanding North Korea, their motivations, and where they're going is essential for understanding the world we live in.
It's about seeing the connections, understanding how seemingly isolated events are actually part of a bigger picture. And in this part of North Korea's story, the narrative is changing. Kim Yo-jong is leading them in a new direction, one that's full of both promise and uncertainty.
It's a time of transition and change, a time that demands our attention and careful thought. And as we navigate this new landscape, it's crucial to be open-minded, skeptical, and willing to challenge what we think we know.
Because sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
And with North Korea, that's definitely the case. So as we continue this deep dive, let's keep that in mind. Let's be open to the unexpected, to the nuances, and to the possibility that we might only be scratching the surface.
It's a journey of discovery, and we're all on it together. And this brings us to a really important question. What does this shift in North Korea's approach mean for the global balance of power?
It's a question a lot of people are thinking about, from experts to everyday people trying to understand what these developments mean.
For sure. You see, for decades, the idea of North Korea as a rogue nation, unpredictable and dangerous, has influenced the global balance of power. But now, with these changes, that perception is being challenged. And the effects of that could be huge.
On one hand, you have this push for modernization, for economic growth, for technological advancement. It makes you think they want to integrate with the rest of the world to become a responsible player on the global stage, following the established rules.
Right.
But then you have their history of isolation, secrecy, and military power. It reminds us that North Korea has always done things their own way, defying expectations and asserting their independence, even if it means going against the grain. So how do these seemingly opposite tendencies coexist? How does Kim Yo-jong balance engaging with the world and maintaining North Korea's unique identity? It really gets to the heart of her leadership and what she sees as the future of her country.
It's like walking a tightrope, and she seems to be doing it with a mix of pragmatism and strategic thinking. It's like she's saying, we're willing to engage, but we'll do it our way. We're willing to adapt, but without giving up who we are.
It's a bold strategy, and it could have big consequences, good or bad. If she can modernize North Korea's economy, integrate them into global trade, and keep things peaceful with their neighbors, it could change the whole geopolitical landscape in East Asia.
It could usher in an era of cooperation and prosperity, something completely different from the tension and uncertainty that have defined the Korean peninsula for so long. It would be a huge change, not just for that region, but for the entire world.
But if she stumbles, if the reforms fail, if tensions rise again, the consequences could be disastrous. Things could easily escalate, and the impact would reach far beyond North Korea.
The risks of conflict, nuclear proliferation, regional instability, they're all very real.
And the world is watching, holding its breath, waiting to see what happens.
That's right.
It reminds us that the global balance of power isn't fixed. It's always shifting, influenced by what countries do, the choices leaders make, the interplay of history and current events. And North Korea, which used to be seen as insignificant, is now a central player. What they do matters, and their decisions will help shape the future.
Absolutely. As we try to make sense of it all, it's crucial to stay informed, to think critically, and to question our own assumptions. Because what's happening in North Korea today could change the world as we know it.
And speaking of changing the world, we can't forget about the human side of all this. It's easy to get caught up in the abstract ideas of power and strategy, but ultimately it's the lives of ordinary people that are most affected by these global shifts.
You're right.
Behind all the headlines, the political maneuvering, the economic data, there are real people just trying to live their lives and create a better future. Their stories are often overlooked, but those stories are so important.
They are. They provide the human context, the emotional connection, the reminder that these global events have a very real impact on individual lives.
Exactly. It's their resilience, their creativity, their spirit that ultimately determines the fate of a nation. And understanding their experiences, their hopes, their fears is essential for understanding the bigger picture. So let's take a moment to focus on that human side. Let's explore how these changes in North Korea are affecting everyday people and what their experiences can teach us about the evolving identity of this nation. It's amazing how we can go from talking about these global power struggles to the personal stories of individuals. It really brings things into perspective, don't you think?
Absolutely. We can look at economic numbers and political strategies all day long, but it's the stories of people that show us the real impact of these changes.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive into North Korea so interesting. We're not just dealing with abstract concepts. We're talking about how these changes are affecting people's lives.
And those lives, those personal stories, are often a lot more complicated and interesting than what we see in the media.
Right.
There's this tendency to oversimplify North Korea, to portray everyone there as the same and completely controlled by the regime, but it's much more diverse than that.
It's like trying to understand a giant, complex tapestry by just looking at one thread. To really get North Korean society, we need to zoom in to look at the individual threads, the personal stories that make up the bigger picture.
Exactly. And those individual stories often show amazing resilience, a quiet strength in the face of hardship. Even with all the difficulties they face, the people of North Korea keep adapting, innovating, finding ways to live a normal life and have a purpose.
It's pretty inspiring, isn't it? This ability to find hope and joy, even in a closed society like that.
It is.
It reminds us how strong the human spirit can be.
It really does. And it makes us question those stereotypes and assumptions we often have about North Korea. We tend to see them as the other, as totally different from us. But when you hear their stories, you realize we share a common humanity, a desire for a better future, a world where our kids can thrive.
It's a good reminder that even with different political systems and ideologies, different cultures, we're all connected by being human.
We are. And that's a message we really need today. With all the division and conflict in the world, the stories of everyday North Koreans show us that we have more in common than we think, and that finding common ground is crucial for a peaceful and prosperous future for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into North Korea, I think the main takeaway is that beyond the politics and the economics, there are real people whose lives are being affected by these changes.
Absolutely. Their stories, their experiences, what they hope for those things deserve to be heard, to be understood, to be recognized.
It's their resilience, their creativity, their spirit that will ultimately shape what happens to North Korea.
Right.
And their voices remind us that even in the toughest situations, the human spirit can persevere, adapt, and find hope.
And with that, we encourage you, our listener, to keep exploring, to look deeper into the stories beyond the headlines, to challenge your own assumptions, and to try to understand this complex and changing world in a more nuanced way.
Remember, the world is full of surprises, and the most insightful understanding often comes from the least expected places.
Yeah.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery.